Hi, folks. This is Jacob Grace, and you're listening to Perennial AF, the Savanna Institute's podcast and blog about perennial agroforestry. It's the time of year when our Agroforestry Apprenticeship program heats up. We're pairing apprentices left and right with mentor farms across the Midwest. And in this episode, I'll be talking with Savanna Institute Research Fellow Xinyuan Shi, who is an apprentice in our program in 2021. When people do something like an apprenticeship, they always want to know what kind of jobs they can get afterwards. And Xinyuan has gotten several. She's also participated in the University of Missouri's Agroforestry Master's Program, which we'll talk more about in the episode. If you are interested in our Agroforestry Apprenticeship program, you better move fast. The program is filling up for this year. You can visit our website at savannainstitute.org to learn more and apply. As you're about to hear, Xinyuan really enjoyed her apprenticeship experience with Route 9 Cooperative in Eastern Ohio, and she even got to use some skills that she wasn't expecting to on their U-Pick chestnut operation. I started off our conversation by asking her what she's been nerding out about lately.
So I guess maybe agroforestry related. New York State has an organic certification organization that's called NOFA. And so they recently just had their Northeast conference, and I attended one of the workshops, and it was held by Hortus. So I think they're in like the Hudson Valley, and it's just like an arboretum. And so the speakers spent like the entire like hour and a half talking about different tree crops, like hardy fruit and nut tree crops in the Northeast. It's like, this is amazing.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, like I learned about a lot of them before in like books and stuff, but they were talking about a few that were new. And there was one that kind of like caught my eye. It was like Arctic kiwi. And it's literally like a kiwi vine that grows up to zone 4. And I'm like, how the heck? Yeah, and it
Whoa.
produces fruit that looks exactly like the kiwi, but it's like maybe slightly bigger than the kiwi, and it's
Huh.
furless. So you
It's
can just pop it
furless.
in. Yeah, it's just like
Whoa.
you can just pop it in like a grape or something.
Well, that's funny because I feel like in the Arctic, all animals need their fur, but the Arctic kiwi has lost its fur. It seems very backwards.
Yeah, but it's awesome. If I ever get any property, that's one of the first things I'm gonna plant.
That's really cool. The
Mhm.
Arctic kiwi. That
Yeah.
makes me think of a dumb joke I heard recently from, I forget, it was someone at Savanna Institute, but they were talking about the definition of a mammal. Mammals have fur and they have milk. And by that definition, a coconut is a mammal because they have fur and they have milk.
Yeah,
So,
basically. Close enough.
right. I thought that was pretty good. But okay, the Arctic kiwi. Well, I may have to add a link to that in the show notes
Yeah, check
so
it
that
out.
people can
If you
look it
guys
up.
are in the northern climate, check it out.
Yeah.
It like takes 10 some years to produce, so maybe plant it now and wait a while, but it's fine.
Yeah, cool. One of the reasons we were interested in doing this interview is because right now we're at the time of year where people are applying to be part of our agroforestry apprenticeship program. And I'd be curious to hear kind of how you found that program and then what you did in that program. And I think other people would be interested to hear that too.
So I loved my experience. Kind of
That's good.
applied, yeah.
If you said you hated it, it probably would have gotten
No,
cut.
no.
But we'll leave it in now.
Yeah, uh so basically right out of college, I applied to go into the Peace Corps, and
Okay.
I was there in Zambia for like a year.
Mhm.
And then COVID happened, so I was kind of looking for work. And
Mm.
then that's, I guess, when I applied for initially for an AmeriCorps position that was kind of looking into agroforestry. But then after that, like it wasn't exactly what I thought it would be. So that's when I was kind of looking for more like farms level, like how do we actually like farm with trees? Like I was very curious about, like how do we produce a crop
Right.
from a tree? And so that's when I found the Savanna Institute Agroforestry Apprenticeship. And I had been kind of eyeing it pretty much the whole year that I was in AmeriCorps. I was like, oh, this sounds like such a cool opportunity. So the timeline worked out. I applied and I got to work for Route 9 Cooperative. So they're a chestnut. They're basically a chestnut cooperative farm out in eastern Ohio, and
Okay.
they're run by Greg and Amy Miller. So Greg is the father and then Amy is his daughter. And that family is just awesome. Like they know so much about nut crops, and like they've been growing chestnuts for like 30 plus years, and they've
Wow.
got established orchards out there. They've got, shipping and delivery system all in place, a processing facility. Like it was awesome to see. Um,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah. So I basically worked all of the late summer and fall with them, and got to spend a lot of time with the local community as well. They had a lot of Amish workers come in, as well as like U pickers. And
Mm.
because, the main customer for chestnuts and Chinese chestnuts are kind of the East Asian crowd.
Hmm.
So it's incredible to see like people driving from Pittsburgh, from Cincinnati, like 3 hours away just to come pick chestnuts on a weekend.
Wow.
And what was even cool is like I never thought I would get to use my Chinese
Oh,
in like eastern, like rural Ohio, but I used
right.
it a lot during
Oh,
that experience. So I was like, oh,
that is
that was
cool.
surprising. Yeah.
You're in rural Iowa, surrounded by Amish communities, and
Yeah.
you have people coming in. You get to.
Talking with, like the Pittsburgh Chinese community.
That's cool.
Like, okay. So there was a surprising amount of diversity while working at that farm.
That's what I've heard is that the chestnut U pick operations, people come from all over, and
Yeah.
people really like being able to collect those. Um,
Yeah, the demand is there.
yeah. Were they growing other types of agroforestry crops too, or are they pretty much focused on chestnuts?
I would say they're mostly focused on chestnuts, but Amy Miller, I think she has some experience with other crops, and so she's been interested in kind of expanding and like diversifying the operation.
Hmm.
But that comes with challenges, like all the infrastructure is there and designed for chestnuts. So who
Right.
knows?
Yeah. Um, and I don't know how they work, but do other growers bring them chestnuts too, since they have the processing facilities?
It's a bit of a long story. Like
Oh,
if
okay.
you get a chance to interview Greg and Amy, I would definitely take it.
Okay.
But yeah, from what they were telling me, I think it was like Greg's father who planted trees on his property initially. And I guess his mindset was that he was tired of like farmers taking trees away from the land. He wanted to purchase a piece of land and add trees to it, like forest
Mm.
it. So
Uh-huh.
that's where the chestnuts originally came from. And then there was like a strip mining company there.
Whoa.
And I think Greg like convinced them to plant chestnuts on their land as a backup plan. If coal doesn't work out, then you can harvest nuts.
Wow.
But that land eventually was sold to the landowners. And so they formed kind of the core group of the cooperative. And
Okay.
they have other chestnut growers as part of the cooperative now that like ship, thousands of pounds of chestnuts. They like deliver it to the cooperative, and then the cooperative sells it through their online store.
Okay. That is really interesting and makes me want to do an interview with them too.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's 3 generations now. If Greg's father
Mm,
planted the chestnuts, it's now made it down to Amy 2 generations later, it sounds like.
yeah, for sure.
So yeah, that's the cool part about agroforestry is that it starts and then it's it ties these generations together, and
Mhm.
I think that's pretty special.
Yeah, it has to. When you talk about such a long living crop, you've got to have
Yeah,
some sort of farm succession plan.
yeah. Um, so what were some of the things that you were doing day to day at your apprenticeship?
Um, so it was me and one other seasonal hiree.
Hmm.
And so we were both kind of doing everything. So we were, they had a nice system where like the local folks, so it was Amish families or it was anyone from the Carrollton community, they would come out and pick buckets of chestnuts and they would be paid per bucket. So like
Mm.
all of their nuts were handpicked, but that meant like at the end of the day, we would have to go out and basically pick up all of the buckets of chestnuts and inventory everything.
Uh-huh.
And like we ran it through the processing, so the sizer they have there, the hot water bath there, and then into the fridge. And then towards the end of the season, we handled a lot of like the shipping stuff. So it was a lot of like packaging boxes and like printing out shipping orders and making sure that the
Mm.
nuts got where they were supposed to go.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was very cool. I was surprised by how fast orders came in and how
Oh,
fast things sold. Like it was pretty crazy. Like pretty much the first day we had hundreds of orders that the online
whoa.
store was open.
Uh-huh.
But yeah,
Huh.
people
So
people really
yeah,
want chestnut.
yeah, people want chestnuts. So it sounds like you were on the farm side, but then also kind of in the processing and sales side and got to see the whole
Yeah.
start to finish there. Yeah. Did you get to eat or
Oh,
cook with many of the chestnuts while you were
of
there?
course.
Yeah.
Of course,
Or
yeah.
were you sick of seeing chestnuts by the end of the day?
I think by the end of the season, I was sick of seeing chestnuts, but I kind of miss it now. Like it was nice to
Mm,
bite into a fresh chestnut.
mm, yeah, that's good. Um, and what would you say, do you have any advice or any tips you would give to people who might be doing the apprenticeship this season? Things to think about or be ready for?
I would say like keep an open mind. You're probably going to end up doing things that you never expected to do. I would also say that, if you don't like outdoor work, maybe don't sign up for a farm apprenticeship.
Right.
But yeah, like it's a lot of fun. And if you have any interest in a particular perennial or tree crop, then, seek out those farms that, produce that and sell that.
Mhm. Then can you tell us about what happened afterwards? So you're now a graduate student at the Center for Agroforestry.
Um, yeah, so after the season ended, I was kind of like, because the degree is so flexible, I was
Hmm.
like a university student. Like I was doing the online master's degree kind of at night after all of the chestnuts were harvested and stuff.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, but yeah, so that didn't really change, but I kind of immediately went into maple production. So
Oh,
I contacted someone out with Cornell, working with Cornell Cooperative Extension. They kind of connected me to Aaron Whiteman. So he runs
uh-huh.
the Cornell Maple program, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I have some, internships or like seasonal work opportunities." So I went from chestnut, which is like a solid crop, to like maple, which is a liquid crop. So
Right.
that was a lot of fun. Yeah. And I spent the winter doing that.
Okay. Um, and so is that what took you out to New York State
Mhm.
or yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what took me back to Ithaca. And then after that season was finished, I started a Cornell cooperative position out in Syracuse, so out in
Oh, okay.
Onondaga County. And
Uh-huh.
so now I work with a group of refugee and immigrant farmers. And
Okay.
so kind of giving them the curriculum to kind of adapt to like a temperate upstate New York climate. Some of them
Mm,
come from tropical nations, so it's a bit of an adjustment.
yeah.
But yeah, like working with them through the farming season, and the organization recently acquired a pretty large farm up in Oswego County, so further north. And
Hmm.
so we're moving everything up there. So it's
Oh my.
yeah, it's some headaches with, farm infrastructure and planning the season with unknown soils, and we'll
Oh
see how it goes.
gosh.
See how it goes.
Wow. That yeah, that's a lot to be working on.
Yeah.
Um,
But I would love to like add some trees into that because I think we get a lot of interest from our refugee farmers. Like we get constantly asked, "Oh, can we plant, mango?" And I'm like, "Well, we can't plant mango, but we could try to do pawpaw." So,
right.
um,
Yeah. Or the Arctic kiwi.
yeah, or the Arctic kiwi. Can plant some kiwis, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah,
lot of interest from them. So I think it's just getting the funding and then the logistics, the coordination, getting the trees in the ground and making sure we take care of them.
yeah. Is there a link or anywhere where people could learn more about that project?
Sure. I could type into chat.
Okay, yeah, I can copy it out of there.
Um,
And it sounds like you're not doing anything directly agroforestry focused with that necessarily, but
nope,
hoping to
but
move that
yeah,
direction. Yeah,
hopefully. I need to
yeah.
write a couple grants first. So that's
Everything
the
starts with a grant.
yeah, basically.
Yeah.
That's the program, but it's run through RISE, which is a separate nonprofit in Syracuse, the Refugee Immigrant Self-Empowerment.
Okay, thanks. Um, and it sounds like some of the farmers coming into the program may have a background in agroforestry.
Yeah, I think we put very clear like categorizations and things. Like we love to name things in the
Mm,
US. But
hmm
you know, like in other countries, they don't really call it agroforestry or silvopasture or like trees versus annuals. It's just agriculture. So like
mm.
one subsistence farm might have some, you know, trees on their home compound, some free-ranging animals, and like their field. So it's not super delineated. So a lot of our farmers, when I talk to them about, you know, oh, feeding, you know, tree leaves to maybe goat livestock, they were like, oh yeah, we used to do that. It's just, you know, slash and care. We just like cut some branches and then took that over to our livestock. I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah. That makes me think of Keith Keeley one time said something like he looks forward to the day when we don't call it agroforestry anymore and just call it farming. So
mhm, for
a
sure.
lot of people already just call it farming. So maybe we can get there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One day.
One day. Yep.
You're listening to a conversation with Xinyuan Shi, a research fellow here at the Savanna Institute, who now also works with Cornell Cooperative Extension in Syracuse, New York. We'll hear more about Xinyuan's work at the Savanna Institute later in the episode. This podcast is made possible by the Grassland 2.0 project, which is working to transform Midwest agriculture to perennial agro-ecosystems, just like we are. Grassland 2.0 believes that caring for ourselves means caring for the land, and that perennial farming methods like managed grazing and agroforestry are our best option for doing so. You can learn more and get involved at grasslandag.org. Up next, we'll hear Xinyuan talk about her work conducting a literature review of silvopasture research across the world. But first, she'll tell a story about her most surprising animal encounter, finding a baby goat in her shower.
So my most surprising animal encounter was it happened when I was in Zambia.
Uh-huh.
So, like I said, like other countries, like there's not really a lot of fencing, so everything is free range,
Mm-hmm.
except during the growing season where they kind of leash all of the animals to make sure they're not like eating field crops.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so like, you know, you kind of just have your hut building and then you have your outdoor outhouse and then an outdoor bathhouse almost.
Mm-hmm.
And like the animals just go everywhere. So there's like chickens, goats, ducks, and yeah, I remember like walking into my outdoor bathhouse in like my bath towel with
Uh-huh.
like my tub of bath water
Uh-huh.
to take a shower. And there was like this baby goat like right in the corner of my bathhouse. I was like, oh, hi there. So like, you know, it's setting the water down and then picking up the baby goat. And it's like screaming the entire time. I'm like, I'm not killing you. Like I swear, like I just want to take a bath.
Just trying to
And
take a
like,
bath.
yeah, and like taking it outside in my bath towel and trying to find the mother goat because it's like screaming at for his baby. And yeah, I'd say that's my surprise.
That is a
And
really
let me
good
tell you,
story.
like baby goats, they are so soft.
Oh,
You can like spend the entire day petting them. Like they're
well,
so soft.
you don't need a towel. You just have your baby goat there. You can like dry off with it and then
Oh my God.
send it back out again. But
I don't think the mother goat would like that.
no, I don't think anybody would like that. But
I also swear these goats were like blind. They would be
Oh,
like 6 feet apart and like screaming at each other.
oh,
I'm
and they
like, you're
couldn't
right
find each
there.
other.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Well, that's a really good surprising animal story. Um, that I guess that could also be a fun, embarrassing farm story, although maybe it's embarrassing for the goat, not for you.
Yeah.
Were there any good stories from your time at the at Route 9 at the Chestnut Cooperative?
Um, Definitely. I would
Uh-huh.
like we had a really awesome harvest party. So Amy
Uh-huh.
coordinated it with Badger Johnson in Athens. And so we
Okay.
had like over 50 people come one weekend. And
Mm-hmm.
we were just like camping out and picking chestnuts and eating chestnuts and like talking with all of the kind of local food groups, like all the local people interested in agroforestry as well as different foods. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was so popular that like I think 4 weeks later, like a smaller group of that, they came again. Like they
Oh.
drove for 3 hours again to spend the weekend on the
Wow.
orchard. So a
That's neat.
lot of good memories out of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of chestnut recipes when people, get together and try to brainstorm how to cook these things.
Uh, that would be fun. Do you have any favorite chestnut recipes that you recommend to people?
Oh, I personally just like roasting them. So there's a way like the Chinese for festivals, like you can kind of pan fry it in like coconut oil,
Uh-huh.
and then, steam finish it. And so like if you cut an X in the nut and then if you do this, it's really easy to peel and it still kind of maintains its moisture and the sugar content of it. So
Okay.
I would say that's my favorite. But during the event, someone brought like a chicken of the wood, and so
Uh-huh.
they made a stew with that and the chestnut, and that was delicious.
Wow. That's cool. It do I forget what kind of trees chicken of the woods grow on, but I'm
I'm
guessing it's
not a
not
mushroom
chestnut trees.
person.
Okay,
I have
I'm
no
not
idea.
either.
I
Somebody will
don't
know.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if
Yeah.
anyone has successfully cultivated that. That's not like one of the common
Might be one
mushrooms I
that,
think of.
yeah, might be one you just have to forage for.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Somebody listening to this right now knows all about
Mhm.
chicken of the woods and will probably write in and tell us what it means. But
Yeah,
uh,
please let me know because yeah, I'd be interested.
yeah, if anyone messages me, I'll pass it on to you.
Sounds good.
One of the things we were going to talk about in the episode today is that you have a couple of different publications that you are working on or have finished already that are agroforestry related and that we wanted to talk about. And then after that, we can get into some of your experience with the apprenticeship program. But um, the first one I wanted to talk about is your publication on um, the kind of an overview of different silvopasture systems. And rather than me kind of butchering it, do you want to give a little overview of what this project was about?
Sure. So I think first off, I am doing the online agroforestry master's degree through the
Okay.
University of Missouri. So I'll give a
Hmm.
quick plug to that. And
Yeah.
as part of the program,
Uh-huh.
my advisor is Dr. Ashley Conway Anderson.
Okay.
So I was talking with her about kind of final projects, and she said that she had a research paper request for kind of a overview, like a literature review of silvopasture systems. And so it was done through the Cabby Journal, and they kind of requested a very broad um, a very broad overview of like the sustainability of silvopasture systems. And when I say broad, I mean like all over the world, not just focused on the US.
Right.
So yeah, like I worked with her for this literature review. It was about 5,000 word limit to kind of just briefly summarize the
Uh-huh.
different, environmental, social, and economic research on silvopasture systems.
Okay. And so you said it was looking at worldwide different research on
Mhm.
silvopasture systems.
Yeah.
And were there certain regions that seemed to have a lot more being published about them than others?
Oh, for sure. I think what was interesting is in the last 20 years, there was a lot of interest in silvopasture research and a lot more publications coming out than in the last, 30 or 40 years. So it's definitely
Okay.
a growing field, especially in science and research. There was a big body of publications coming out of, Brazil with kind of cattle silvopasture systems. There was another body of silvopasture research coming out of the US, kind of focused more on the Midwest, as well as a little bit in the Northeast and Southwest. Or sorry, not Southwest, Southeast. And then there was another big body of literature coming out of Europe, and so this is like more of the older dehesas and montado traditional silvopasture systems in Portugal and Spain. There
Okay.
were a few publications coming out of Asia and then Africa, but I think the majority was coming from those three regions: Brazil, the US, and Europe,
Okay.
Spain and Portugal. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it kind of sounds like it ramped up over the last couple decades, you said, last 20 years or so.
Yeah, for sure. People are interested in more sustainable agricultural systems, so
Yeah.
silvopasture is a good option.
Uh-huh. And so when you were looking for this research, were you kind of focusing on the word silvopasture, or were you trying to find research on things that were silvopasture but maybe weren't calling it that?
So for our keyword search, we did use silvopasture. We also used agro-pastoral, agro-silvopastoral. So we used a few kind of iterations of, a silvopasture system. I
Hmm.
would say like most of the Western Hemisphere, so like, North America and South America, they mostly use silvopasture. Whereas, the Dehesas and Matados, they have their own name. And like other, I would say like African research mostly use like agro-silvopastoral or agro-pastoral. So
Okay.
it's a very like there's many different definitions for livestock, integrated
Hmm.
livestock tree and pasture systems. So we tried to capture most of them, but I know that like certain local areas or like languages we just didn't know the terms. So mm,
Yeah, it sounds kind of like agroforestry, where there end up being a lot of different words for similar
yeah,
things.
for sure.
Yeah,
It's hard to define some of these systems sometimes.
right. Yeah, and I imagine somewhere maybe the livestock aren't the focus so much, and maybe that's like the Dehesa even, where people don't necessarily think of it as silvopasture, but they are there are trees and livestock there, and it is happening.
Yeah, exactly. It's more of a kind of a traditional landscape. It is an agricultural system, but like it's been kind of adopted for so long that people just view it as part of kind of the landscape. Mhm.
Right. Yeah. What would you say was like the biggest surprise you found, if any, with this research?
I think talking about sustainability, like we found a lot of environmental articles looking at
Hmm.
kind of the different interactions between different components of a silvopasture system. But what I found surprising was there wasn't a lot of literature on kind of the social aspects or like
Mm.
adoption of silvopasture. I think that was a huge, gap or missing opportunity for future research. But at the same time, like some of the research that did look at kind of the social sustainability, like focused on not just US-based silvopasture, but across the world. And they were finding that some of these older traditional silvopastoral systems, these integrated tree livestock systems, were kind of on the decline,
Mm.
unfortunately. And that's
Yeah.
kind of due to both internal and external pressures. So sometimes it's like government policy, sometimes it's like maybe certain pastoral lifestyles are looked down upon. There's environmental pressures as well as, the internal pressures of families, the next generation moving to the cities, trying to find other kind of income and not knowing if silvopasture or any sort of agricultural system will support the family.
Mm. Having finished this up, what do you have in mind, you or Dr. Conway, as kind of the next steps? Are there other directions you'd like to go from here?
I'm not sure about like other research, but for me, personally, I think just finishing my master's program.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure your advisor would like that too.
Yeah.
Always, always like to get people finished and get things published.
Oh, yeah,
So,
for sure. This research fellow position that I'm working with, Savanna Institute, and Gary Bentrup from the USDA Forest Service,
Hmm.
is basically to update his 2008 conservation buffer guideline. So this PDF booklet, or you could order it online, you can just kind of type into Google and find it.
Hmm.
And it did come out in 2008. So we're trying to basically update it with the new research and looking at kind of different ways to reorganize the structure.
Hmm.
But what we're trying to do is another kind of broad overview of all the different uses of a conservation buffer. And we might actually end up renaming it to something like multifunctional buffer, because we're
Mm.
really not just looking at the conservation aspect of it. We're looking at kind of all the different uses for like a vegetated strip of land. And yeah, it's pretty comprehensive. We go over things like water quality, biodiversity, the protection aspects of it, the aesthetic aspects of it, the economic opportunities there. And we're just going through reading literature and updating it.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I'm hopeful it's going to be a good resource for people in the field to kind of start off. Like if they're meeting with someone who wants like some sort of design, they can use that guidebook as like a starting off point. Um, and of course, it's a great teaching tool. I think why we ended up changing it was because like conservation buffer kind of focuses on the word conservation. So when you hear that, you
Hmm.
might think like biodiversity or water quality or something with the biotic environment. And
Hmm.
so we were kind of looking at, and the original 2008 version already has a lot of, like it has a section on protection and safety and aesthetics and economic opportunity. So those
Hmm.
things aren't necessarily things that you might think of when you hear conservation buffer. So I think the mindset to change it to like something like multifunctional buffer is due to that, because we want to kind of encompass all of the different services that a vegetated strip of land can provide.
And so if you're working with the National Agroforestry Center, I assume this is kind of like across the US, thinking about all the different forms this can take. Um,
We are trying to not, we are trying to like create a resource that can be used in multiple regions of the US. It does
hmm.
focus on kind of more temperate, I would say, ecosystems. So maybe more northern versus like a desert ecosystem. So it's
Uh-huh.
supposed to be a little bit more broad, so it can be used in multiple regions.
Hmm.
But that being said, it is only supposed to be a starting point. So like it doesn't go into super depth about like it'll give you guidelines or good
Hmm.
rules to follow. But like if you're talking about your own local region and maybe central Wisconsin or something, you should talk to your local expertise.
Yeah, that's good advice.
I I think I really appreciate this opportunity because it's
Uh-huh.
shown me how much research goes into writing like maybe a paragraph in this book. So we're reading
Uh-huh.
like hundreds of papers just to kind of take tiny little tidbits from each paper to try to put something that like anyone can read.
Mm, yeah.
So it's interesting how like research kind of funnels down. It gets super specific, and then you kind of take broad tidbits from it, and it funnels down into a guidebook like this that anyone can read.
Mm. That would be an interesting process to be a part of. Who would be the main people that you foresee using this? Would it be like NRCS staff members or
I
yeah.
think any technical service provider can use it as a starting point. So there's quite a lot of like simple images in it and like pictures that kind of
Hmm.
show like the design or like how you might measure a certain space. So
Hmm.
I think that's a good starting point if you're talking with practitioners or people who are interested in agroforestry or interested in any sort of conservation buffer. You might show them this kind of guide and like show them how the design was thought through. But it could also be a good teaching tool for like college classes, like if you're looking at landscape design or any sort of agroecology or any sort of
Mm,
conservation buffer class,
yeah.
like you could use this as a good starting point to talk with students about certain why we do the things we do, I guess.
Yeah, that that sounds like a great way to use it. And it really makes me think about how like buffers and borders like this are often the first way to get trees back onto a landscape is, even if people aren't ready to plant them out in the field, you can get them on the edge of a field or the edge of a waterway or something like that. So
For sure. There's plenty of kind of good rules to follow in the guidebook for that. So
great. Okay, we're doing great. I think we're in the last little bit here. So maybe we can just go through these agroforestry would you rathers. So there's no wrong answer here. This is just fun questions. I love getting to hear what people think of these. So the first agroforestry would you rather is Xinyuan, would you rather raise goats, pigs, or chickens?
definitely chickens.
Definitely
I'm a
chickens.
fan of, yeah, I'm a fan
Okay.
of eggs, and
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't know what I would do with a sheep or a goat. Like, I just don't
Yeah.
know.
They would end up when you're trying to like take a shower or take a bath and you'd
Yeah.
have to chase them
Yeah.
out. So
Yeah, ruminants are beyond me.
yep, that's a good answer. Okay. Would you rather work in a place that had frequent flooding, constant drought, or frequent windstorms?
Can I say like none of the above?
Right. Or maybe, yeah,
Um,
even just live in. It's kind of a tough question to answer.
I think I
But
would probably um, live in a place with more frequent floods because I feel like that may not be immediately fixable, but in my mind, like a flooding issue is less a water issue and more a soil issue. So I would kind of
mm,
look into if you have like property, if you have land, if you're farming, looking into practices to like get more water to infiltrate the soil. So I feel like that's more fixable.
yeah, that
Than like, yeah, like I don't know what you would do if water's not coming, or
right.
if a tornado came through. So maybe plant more windbreaks.
Right. I really like that answer though, of picking the one that you could control a little bit. So that's a good answer. Um, let's see. I guess this is the last one. Oh, I love people's answers to this. Would you rather work with someone who doesn't know how to use any of your equipment or someone who is always grouchy?
I think I would want to work with someone that doesn't know how to use the equipment,
Uh-huh.
provided, because like that's been me in the past. But provided that they like have a good attitude and can listen and can work or can learn quickly,
Yeah,
so that they pick up those skills. Like I think a lot of, the machine skills, like they just take practice. So if they're willing to learn and practice, then I don't see a problem.
that's a good answer. I agree with that. All right. Sinuan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk here today. I really
Fun.
appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know it's kind of an extra thing on top of researching conservation buffers and preparing for a whole growing season in a place you don't even know what the soils are going to be yet. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for putting it together. It was a lot of fun. It's a good break from all that.
Well, good.
That was Savanna Institute Research Fellow Xinyuan Shi talking about her experiences studying and practicing agroforestry, or as some people call it, farming. Thanks to Xinyuan for taking the time to talk with me, and for all the great work she's doing making more agroforestry possible. I hope she's gotten more details about the new farm by now. If you have something you'd like to hear on this podcast, or a question you'd like to ask, or a story you'd like to tell, please let me know. You can leave us a voicemail at 608-448-6432, or send us a message on social media at Savanna Institute, and it'll find its way to me. That's Savanna with no H, 2 N's, 3 A's, and an S and a V. I think I forgot to mention the S in the last episode, and you definitely need the S. Thanks for listening. If you want to get our newest episodes when they come out, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And if you're really feeling inspired and want to help us out, you can rate this podcast and write a review. It only takes a second, and it really helps this podcast get heard by more people. That's it for me. Keep up the good work out there, take lots of breaks, and keep it Perennial AF.
Want to see a future that's Perennial AF? If you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you're already taking steps to make that happen. But did you know you don't have to be a farmer or a researcher to make a big AF impact on climate change? Here at the Savanna Institute, we lay the groundwork for widespread agroforestry throughout the Midwest, conducting the research, education, and outreach necessary to transform agriculture and combat climate change. But we can't do this alone. Even with a rockstar lineup of tree crop breeders and community agroforesters and technical service providers, transformative change requires a community of people working together, and we need you. Becoming a monthly donor is one of the best ways to be a part of the transformation and affect positive change for our climate. Visit our website at savannainstitute.org/give to learn more.